You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 6,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. My name is Father Daniel Cromwell, and what I'm about to tell you will be dismissed as madness by those who hear it. The Vatican has already buried the evidence, sealed the files in their deepest archives, and ensured that my name will never be spoken in the halls of the congregation for the doctrine of the faith again. But I need someone to know the truth. I need someone to understand what happened in that forgotten village in the Carpathian Mountains, and why I can never leave. This is my confession, my testimony, my warning. It began on a Wednesday in October 2024, though it feels like a lifetime ago now. I was 38 years old then, still young enough to believe I understood the nature of evil, still naive enough to think that faith and training could protect me from anything. I'd spent 12 years as an investigator for the Vatican, travelling to remote corners of the world where people claim to see demons, where the boundaries between the rational and the impossible seemed to blur. Most cases had simple explanations. A grieving widow hearing her husband's voice was processing trauma. A child speaking in tongues was suffering from a psychological disorder. Stigmata could be self-inflicted, even unconsciously. Poltergeist activity was usually plumbing or foundation issues. In 12 years, I'd investigated over 200 cases, and perhaps 10 of them had been genuine encounters with something beyond our understanding. 10 cases where I performed actual exorcisms, where I'd faced something that defied every law of nature and reason. I thought I'd seen the worst that existed in the shadows of our world. I was wrong. Cardinal Isadora Benedetti summoned me to his office that Wednesday afternoon. The autumn sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting fragments of coloured light across the Persian rug and the Cardinal's massive oak desk. At 73, Benedetti had the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life wrestling with questions that had no answers. His eyes, though, remained sharp and penetrating, the eyes of someone who missed nothing. He didn't offer pleasantries or small talk. That should have been my first warning. "Father Cromwell," he said, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken concerns, "I have a case that requires your particular expertise. Please sit." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, and he slid a file toward me. The leather binding was old, cracked with age, and when I opened it, the pages inside were so brittle I was afraid they might crumble at my touch. The documents were written in a mixture of Romanian and Latin, the ink faded to brown, some pages stained with what looked like water damage, or tears. "This case dates back to 1847, Cardinal Benedetti began, folding his hands on his desk. "A village called Morăști in the Carpathian Mountains. Population then was around 400. Now it's barely 300. The village has remained isolated, unchanged, as if time itself has forgotten it exists." I began reading the testimonies, translating the Romanian as I went. A woman named Isadora Vladescu had appeared in Morăști in the spring of 1847. She'd come from nowhere, with no family, no history, claiming only that she was a healer seeking a quiet place to practice her craft. The villagers, desperate for medical care in that remote location, had welcomed her. For 3 months, everything had been perfect. Isadora could cure fevers that would have killed strong men. She could set bones so precisely they healed without leaving the person crippled. She eased the pain of childbirth and helped barren women conceive. The village priest at the time, Father Daniel Cromwell, had been suspicious of her abilities but couldn't deny their effectiveness. Then the children started disappearing. The first was a 7-year-old boy named Constantine. He went to bed in his parents' house, both doors locked, both windows latched shut from the inside. In the morning, he was gone. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no evidence of forced entry. Simply gone, as if he'd never existed at all. Within 2 weeks, 4 more children had vanished under identical circumstances. The village searched the forests, dragged the river, questioned every traveller who'd passed through in the previous months. They found nothing, but they noticed that Isadora would disappear on the nights the children vanished. They'd see strange lights in the forest, hear singing in a language that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Father George confronted Isadora, demanding to know what she was doing in the forest. According to his journal entry, she'd laughed at him, a sound he described as beautiful and terrible in equal measure. She told him she was keeping a promise made in blood and ash, and that he should be grateful for her presence. When he threatened to report her to the church authorities, she'd simply smiled and walked away. That night, 2 more children disappeared. The next morning, Isadora Vladescu was gone. The church sent investigators, but by the time they arrived weeks later, there was no trace of her. The 7 missing children were never found. No bodies, no evidence, no closure for the grieving families. The case was filed away as unsolved. Another mystery in a world full of them, and eventually forgotten. I looked up from the file to find Cardinal Benedetti watching me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That was 177 years ago," I said. "Why are you showing me this now?" 3 weeks ago I received a letter from Father Isadora Vladescu, the current priest in Morăști. He pulled out a newer document, this one written on modern paper in shaky handwriting. He reports that 7 children have disappeared from the village in the past 2 months. Same circumstances, same impossibilities. And Father Cromwell, the villagers claim they've seen Isadora Vladescu again. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm afternoon sun. That's impossible. She'd be over 200 years old. "I'm aware of the mathematical improbability," Cardinal Benedetti said dryly. "Nevertheless, Father Radulescu sent this." He handed me a photograph. It was clearly taken on a modern phone, the image slightly blurred, as if the photographer's hand had been shaking. It showed a woman standing at the edge of a forest, partially obscured by mist. She was thin to the point of gauntness, wearing what looked like a dress from the 1800s. The quality wasn't good enough to make out her features clearly, but something about her posture, the tilt of her head, made my skin crawl. Father Radulescu compared this to a photograph in the village archives, Cardinal Benedetti continued. A picture taken in 1847, shortly before the disappearances began. He placed another photograph beside the first. Even accounting for the differences in photographic technology, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same dress, the same gaunt frame, the same unsettling posture. It was as if the same woman had been photographed 177 years apart. "I need you to go to Morăști," Cardinal Benedetti said. "Investigate these disappearances, determine if there's any connection to the historical case, and if you find evidence of supernatural activity, deal with it accordingly." "You mean perform an exorcism?" "If necessary, yes, but Father Cromwell, be careful. This case has been sealed in our archives for nearly 2 centuries. There are notes in the margins, written by various investigators over the years. Warnings. Several priests were sent to Morăști over the decades. Not all of them returned, and those who did refused to speak about what they'd seen." He opened the file to a page near the back. I saw a note scrawled in Italian, dated 1893. "Do not send anyone else to this place. Some doors should remain closed." Below it, in different handwriting, dated 1956. "The 7 are waiting. They hunger." And another, from 1978. "I saw her in the forest. She begged me to help her. I ran. God forgive me, I ran. What aren't you telling me? I asked. Cardinal Benedetti leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. There are older documents, Father Cromwell. Records from 1723. They speak of 7 women who were burned as witches in Morăști. The church sanctioned their execution. They were accused of causing sickness, blighting crops, cursing livestock. The standard accusations of that era. And according to the records, as they burned, they cursed the village. They swore they would return, that they would take the children of those who condemned them, that their revenge would span generations. He paused. Isadora Vladescu arrived exactly 124 years after those burnings. The number has significance in certain occult practices. It represents a debt coming due. I spent the next 3 days in preparation. I packed my travelling case with everything I might need. A leather-bound journal for documenting the investigation, 3 vials of holy water that had been blessed by Pope Francis himself, a silver crucifix that had belonged to my grandfather, my worn copy of the Roman ritual with its prayers of exorcism, and a small wooden box containing relics of St. Michael the Archangel. I also packed practical items, a flashlight, a digital recorder, a camera, and enough warm clothing for the mountain weather. I researched everything I could find about Morăști. The village sat in a remote valley of the Carpathian Mountains, accessible only by a single winding road that was frequently impassable during winter. There was no cell phone coverage, no internet connectivity, no modern infrastructure beyond basic electricity and running water. The village had one church built in the 14th century and one school that served about 20 children. The population had been slowly declining for decades as young people left for opportunities in larger cities. The land itself had a dark history. Before the village existed, the valley had been considered cursed by local peoples. They believed spirits lived in the forests, ancient things that predated human habitation. The first settlers had been Christians fleeing persecution in the 1200s, and they'd built their church as a bulwark against whatever dwelt in the woods. For centuries there had been an uneasy peace. The villagers stayed within their boundaries, left offerings at the forest edge during certain seasons, and didn't ask questions about things that happened in the dark. Then came the witch trials of 1723. A new priest, young and zealous, had declared war on the old traditions. He'd identified 7 women who still practiced the ancient ways, who served as healers and midwives, who maintained the old relationship with the forest. He called them witches, servants of Satan, and convinced the village that every misfortune was their doing. The women were given a trial that was a mockery of justice, then dragged to the forest and burned alive. According to the records, their screams had echoed through the valley for hours, and when the fires finally died, the priest who'd condemned them, Father Andrei Vasile, had written in his journal that he'd heard them singing as they burned, singing in a language he'd never heard before, words that seemed to burrow into his mind and refused to leave. Within a year, the first child had disappeared, then more. The pattern continued for 17 years before suddenly stopping. No one knew why. The disappearances became a dark chapter in the village's history, something mentioned only in whispers, if at all, until Isadora Vladescu had arrived in 1847 and it started again. The Vatican arranged my travel. I flew from Rome to Bucharest, then hired a driver to take me to Morăști. His name was Vasile Popescu, a quiet man in his mid-50s with calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. He drove an old truck that had seen better days, its suspension groaning as we left the highway and began the climb into the mountains. For the first hour, Vasile said nothing. He kept his eyes on the road, navigating switchbacks and potholes with practiced ease. The landscape around us changed gradually, the modern world falling away mile by mile. We passed through small towns that looked like they hadn't changed in 50 years. Then through forests so old and dense that the road became a tunnel of shadows. Finally, as we climbed higher, Vasile broke his silence. "You're the priest they sent," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, how did you know?" "My cousin lives in Morăști. She called me, asked me to pick you up from the airport. She said to bring you straight to Father Lucian." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "She also said to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "That place. It's not right. Never has been. My grandfather was from Morăști, left when he was young and never went back. He told me stories when I was a boy. Stories about the forest, about things that lived there before people came, about the 7 women who were burned and how they cursed the village as they died." "Do you believe those stories?" Vasile was quiet for a long moment. "I believe that some places are older than our understanding. I believe that sometimes when people do terrible things, the echo of that evil lingers. And I believe that my cousin's voice shook with fear when she called me, and she's not a woman who frightens easily." We drove for another 2 hours, the road becoming progressively worse. The forest pressed in on both sides, ancient trees whose branches formed a canopy so thick that it felt like driving through twilight even though it was early afternoon. Mist clung to the ground, swirling across the road in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. Finally, about 2 miles from the village according to my GPS, Vasile pulled the truck to the side of the road where it forked. One path continued upward towards Morăști, the other disappeared into the trees. "This is as far as I go," he said, turning off the engine. "We're still 2 miles from the village." "I know, but I won't drive into Morăști. I have children, Father, a daughter and 2 sons. I won't risk bringing something back to them." He helped me unload my bags from the truck bed, then handed me a business card. "This has my number. If you need to leave, if you can get to a phone, call me. I'll come as close as I dare." "Thank you," I said, shouldering my bags. Vasile got back in his truck, then paused before starting the engine. "Father Cromwell?" "My grandfather. Before he died, he told me one more thing about Morăști. He said that some evils are older than Christ, older than any God we pray to. He said there are things in this world that our prayers can't touch, things that existed before we had words for good and evil. If you find something like that in Morăști, don't try to fight it. Just run." Then he started the truck and drove away, leaving me alone on that isolated mountain road with the mist and the silence, and the growing sense that I was being watched. The walk to Morăști took me 40 minutes. The path was steep and overgrown in places, lined with stones that might have been ancient markers or might have been natural formations. The mist grew thicker as I climbed, until I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. My breath came in short gasps, my legs burning with exertion. I had to stop twice to rest, setting my bags down and listening to the sounds of the forest around me. But there were no sounds, no birds singing, no insects buzzing, no small animals rustling through the underbrush. Just silence, broken only by my own breathing and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. It was the kind of silence that felt deliberate, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. When I finally emerged from the mist, Morăști lay before me like something from a medieval painting. The village clung to the mountainside, its houses built from dark wood and stone that had weathered centuries of harsh winters. Cobblestone streets wound between the buildings, narrow and winding, following the natural contours of the land. The roofs sagged under the weight of age, and many of the houses had clearly been patched and repaired countless times. There were no cars, no power lines, no satellite dishes. A few chimneys released thin streams of smoke into the grey sky. At the village's centre, rising above everything else, stood the church. It was built from the same dark stone as the houses, its spire reaching towards the clouds like an accusing finger. Even from a distance, I could see the age in its walls, the way time had worn down the carvings around its entrance, the way the stones had settled and shifted over the centuries. But what struck me most was the emptiness. It was late afternoon, the time when villages should be bustling with activity. Children playing, adults going about their business, the normal rhythms of daily life. Instead, the streets were deserted. Not a single person was visible. The only signs of habitation were the smoke from those few chimneys and laundry hanging motionless in the still air. I made my way through the silent streets toward the church, my footsteps echoing off the cobblestones. As I walked, I felt eyes watching me from windows, saw curtains twitch and fall back into place. The villagers were here, they were just hiding, from what I didn't yet know. The church door was ancient oak, reinforced with iron bands that had rusted to a deep red-brown over the centuries. I knocked 3 times, the sound seeming too loud in the oppressive silence. When no one answered, I pushed the door open. The interior was dark, lit only by a handful of candles burning near the altar. The air smelled of incense, old wood, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Something vaguely unpleasant. The walls were covered in frescoes so old that the images had faded to mere suggestions. Saints with their faces worn away, angels with their wings barely visible, scenes from the Bible that had been painted over and repainted so many times they'd become palimpsests of devotion. Father Cromwell. The voice came from the shadows near the confessional. I turned to see a man emerge, thin and stooped, wearing a black cassock that looked like it had been patched and mended countless times. Father Lucian Radulescu was 71 years old, but he looked ancient. His face was deeply lined, his skin pale and papery, his hands trembling with a constant tremor, but his eyes were what truly disturbed me. They had the hollow, haunted look of someone who hadn't truly slept in weeks, someone who'd seen things that had fundamentally broken something inside them. "Father Lucian," I said, setting down my bags and extending my hand. "Thank you for meeting me." He looked at my hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip was weak, his skin cold despite the warm afternoon. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm grateful you did. Come, we need to talk somewhere the walls won't listen." He led me through a door, behind the altar, down a narrow stone staircase into the church basement. His quarters were small and spare, a narrow bed with a single thin blanket, a desk piled high with papers, a wood stove that barely kept the damp chill at bay. He poured us both glasses of tweaker, the traditional Romanian plum brandy, and sat down heavily in the room's only chair. I perched on the edge of his bed. "7 children," he began without preamble, staring into his glass as if he might find answers there. "In the past 2 months, all between the ages of 6 and 14, all taken from their beds in the middle of the night, from locked rooms, with no evidence of how they disappeared." "Tell me everything," I said, pulling out my journal. "Start from the beginning." Father Lucian took a long drink, his hand shaking so badly he nearly spilled the brandy. "It started in early August. Raluca Stoica, age 9. Sweet girl, loved to draw flowers and birds. Her parents put her to bed as usual, locked both doors to the house as they always do, checked that all the windows were latched. Around 3 in the morning, her mother Catalina woke up. She told me she heard singing, a woman's voice, beautiful but somehow wrong. The singing seemed to be coming from Raluca's room. Did she recognize the language? No, she said it wasn't Romanian, wasn't any language she'd ever heard. But somehow she understood its meaning. It was calling to Raluca, inviting her to come away, promising her wonderful things. He paused, his eyes distant. Catalina tried to open Raluca's door. It wouldn't move, not locked, mind you, just wouldn't open, like something was holding it shut from the other side. she called for her husband, Mihai. He threw himself against that door over and over, bruising his shoulder badly. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. How long did this last? Maybe 10 minutes, then suddenly, the door flew open so fast that Mihai fell through. The room was empty. Raluca was gone. The window was still latched from the inside. There was no way out, Father Cromwell. No way she could have left that room, but she was gone. I wrote quickly, documenting every detail. And the other children, same circumstances. Father Lucian nodded, draining his glass and pouring another. The Ionescu twins, Andrei and Bogdan, age 7, taken the same night, both from the same room. Their mother Ileana heard the singing, couldn't get the door open. Then Florin Mihailescu, age 12. Then little Adriana Popa, only 6 years old. Then Christian Dumitru, 14. And just last week, Petru Diaconu, age 6. Have you found any physical evidence, anything at all? Come with me, he said, standing unsteadily. I'll show you. We left the church as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and copper. The village was still eerily quiet, though I could see more signs of life now. A woman hurrying down a side street, a man peering at us from a doorway before quickly closing the door. Father Lucian led me through the winding streets to a small house near the village's edge. A woman answered his knock. Catalina Stoica was in her late 30s, but grief had aged her. Her face was gaunt, her eyes red and sunken from crying, her hair streaked with grey that hadn't been there 2 months ago. She said nothing, just stepped aside to let us enter. The house was small and tidy, everything in its place, but there was a hollowness to it. The feeling of a home where joy had died. Catalina led us upstairs to Raluca's room without a word. The room was exactly as you'd expect a 9-year-old girl's bedroom to look. A narrow bed with a handmade quilt covered in embroidered flowers. A shelf with a few wooden toys and rag dolls. Drawings pinned to the walls, childish but charming depictions of birds and flowers and the forest. But on the doorframe, running from floor to ceiling, were deep gouges in the wood. I approached them carefully, running my fingers over the marks. They looked like claw marks, but no animal I knew could have made them. They were too long, easily 10 inches each, and they cut deep into the hard wood. There were 7 of them, perfectly parallel, as if something with 7 fingers had dragged its hand down the frame. These weren't here before, Catalina said, her voice flat and emotionless. I would have noticed. I would have seen them. And the singing, I asked gently. Can you describe it more? What did it sound like? She closed her eyes and tears slipped down her cheeks. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, like angels singing, if angels hated us. The voice was clear and pure, but there was something underneath it, something that made my skin crawl. And it wasn't just in my ears, Father. It was inside my head, like someone was singing directly into my mind. Did you understand the words? Not exactly, but I felt what they meant. They were calling to Raluca, telling her not to be afraid, promising her she'd be safe, that she'd never be lonely again. They were promising her sisters, 7 sisters who would love her and care for her forever. My blood ran cold. 7 sisters. The same number as the women burned in 1723. The same number of children who'd disappeared. May I examine the room more closely? I asked. Catalina nodded and left, unable to bear being in her daughter's room any longer. Father Lucian waited in the hallway while I conducted my search. I checked the window first, a simple wooden frame with an iron latch that locked from the inside. The latch was still engaged, and there were no scratches or signs of tampering. The window itself was warped from age and looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I examined the walls next, tapping them for hollow spaces, looking for any hidden passages or openings. Solid stone, no anomalies. The floor was wooden planks, worn smooth by generations of feet. I got down on my hands and knees, checking every board for loose ones that might hide a space beneath. That's when I found the symbol. It was carved into the floorboards beneath Raluca's bed, hidden from casual view. I had to drag the bed aside to see it clearly. The symbol was roughly circular, about 6 inches across, carved deep into the wood. 7 lines radiated from a central point, like the spokes of a wheel, each line terminating in a small circle. The carving was fresh. I could see pale wood where the blade had cut through the aged surface. I pulled out my journal and sketched it carefully, taking measurements, noting every detail. This hadn't been done quickly or carelessly. Someone had spent time here, had carved this with intention and precision. But when? And how had they gotten into a locked room? Unless they hadn't needed to enter physically at all. I spent another 30 minutes in the room taking photographs, making notes, looking for anything else unusual. I found nothing. Finally, I replaced the bed and went downstairs to find Catalina and her husband Mihai. They sat at their kitchen table, holding hands, staring at nothing. When I entered, they looked up with desperate hope in their eyes. "Can you help us?" Mihai asked. "Can you bring our daughter back?" I wanted to give them hope. Wanted to tell them that I'd solved cases like this before, that their daughter would be home soon. But I'd learned long ago that false hope was crueler than honest uncertainty. "I'm going to do everything in my power," I said instead, "but I need to understand what happened. Raluca had nightmares before she disappeared, didn't she?" They exchanged glances. "How did you know?" Catalina asked. "Tell me about them." "For 3 nights before she vanished, Raluca woke up screaming," Mihai said. "She told us there was a woman in her room, standing at the foot of her bed, watching her. We checked, of course, there was never anyone there. We thought it was just bad dreams, that maybe she'd heard a scary story from one of the other children." "What did this woman look like?" "Raluca said she was very thin, with long dark hair. She wore an old-fashioned dress, like from a long time ago. But her eyes..." Catalina's voice broke. "Raluca said her eyes were empty, like holes in her face where eyes should be." "Did the woman speak to her?" "Every night she sang, the same song we heard the night Raluca disappeared. Raluca said the woman was singing about 7 sisters who were waiting for their children to come home." I felt the pieces beginning to come together, forming a picture that was deeply disturbing. "One more question. Has your family lived in Morăști for a long time?" Mihai nodded. "Generations. My great-great-great-grandfather was one of the village founders. The Stoica family has been here since the beginning. And in 1723 was there a Stoica involved in the witch trials." His face paled. "How do you know about that?" "Please, it's important." "Yes," he said quietly. "Vasile Stoica. He was one of the men who carried out the burnings. It's not something our family talks about. It's a shameful part of our history." I thanked them and left with Father Lucian. As we walked back to the church through the gathering darkness, I asked him to arrange meetings with the other families who'd lost children. Over the next 3 hours I interviewed them all, and the story was always the same. 3 nights of nightmares where a thin woman with empty eyes stood at the foot of the bed, singing about 7 sisters. Then, on the 4th night, the parents would hear the singing themselves, find themselves unable to open their child's door, and when they finally broke through, the child would be gone. 7 parallel gouges on the doorframe, a circular symbol with 7 radiating lines carved beneath the bed. And always the family's history traced back to the village's founding, back to men who'd participated in the burning of 7 women in 1723. This wasn't random, this was revenge, carried out across centuries, precise and purposeful. By the time I finished the last interview, it was nearly midnight. I returned to the church to find Father Lucian waiting for me in his quarters. A simple meal of bread, cheese and smoked meat laid out on his desk. "You see it now, don't you?" he said as I sat down. "The pattern. 7 women burned, 7 children taken, all from families whose ancestors participated in the burnings." I pulled out my journal, reviewing my notes. But that was 1723, over 300 years ago. Why start again now? What changed? "Isadora Vladescu," Father Lucian said. "I told the Cardinal I've seen her 3 times. Tell me about the first time." He poured himself another glass of Tuica, his hands shaking so badly that liquid sloshed over the rim. "It was about a month ago, mid-September. I was walking back from visiting old Georgi Dumitru. He has arthritis and can barely leave his house. It was dusk, that time when shadows get long and the light turns strange. I saw her at the forest edge, maybe 50 meters from the village boundary." "Did you recognize her from the photographs?" "Immediately. She was exactly as she appears in that picture from 1847. Impossibly thin, wearing that same tattered dress, her hair hanging limp around her face. But her eyes, Father Cromwell. In the photographs, her eyes just look dark. In person, they're..." He struggled to find words. "They're not empty. They're full. But full of something that shouldn't exist, something that makes your mind recoil from looking directly at her." "What did you do?" "I called out to her, asked her who she was, what she wanted. She just smiled, and that smile was the saddest thing I've ever seen. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees. I tried to follow, but the forest was pitch black, and I'm an old man. I lost her within minutes. And the second time, a week later, I saw her standing outside the Popa house the night before little Adriana disappeared. She was just standing there in the street, looking up at Adriana's window. I ran towards her, but she vanished before I could get close, like she'd never been there at all. And the third time," Father Lucian set down his glass, his hands trembling even worse now. "Last week, after Petru Diaconu disappeared. I followed her. She led me into the forest, to a clearing about half a mile from the village. There are 7 trees there, arranged in a circle. Ancient oaks, the oldest trees in the forest, and burned into each trunk is that same symbol you found in the children's rooms." "Show me," I said, standing up. "Now. Father Cromwell, it's past midnight. We shouldn't go into those woods at night. That's when she's strongest, when they're all strongest. Then that's when I need to see them." We armed ourselves with flashlights, though Father Lucian warned me they might not help. I wore my crucifix over my cassock, carried holy water in my pocket, and brought my worn copy of the Roman ritual. Father Lucian carried a lantern and a walking stick, looking like something from another century. The forest at night was a different world from the forest in daylight. Our flashlight beams seemed weak and inadequate against the darkness, illuminating only small circles of ground and tree trunks, while everything beyond remained pitch black. The silence was absolute, broken only by our footsteps on the path and our ragged breathing. Every shadow seemed to move, every tree seemed to lean toward us, and I had the constant sensation of being watched by dozens of unseen eyes. Father Lucian led the way, following a narrow path that wound deeper into the woods. Neither of us spoke. The silence felt sacred somehow, or perhaps just too dangerous to break. After about 20 minutes of walking, Father Lucian stopped and pointed ahead. "There," he whispered. "The clearing." I could see it, a break in the canopy, where moonlight filtered through, creating a circle of pale silver illumination about 30 feet across. Around the perimeter stood 7 massive oak trees, each one ancient and gnarled, their branches twisted into shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost purposeful. "Wait here," I told Father Lucian. "Father Cromwell, please, you shouldn't..." But I was already moving forward, my crucifix held before me, prayers forming on my lips. I stepped into the clearing, and immediately the temperature dropped. My breath came out in visible clouds, even though it was only October and the night wasn't particularly cold. The 7 trees loomed around me like silent sentinels, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out most of the sky, leaving only small gaps where moonlight could penetrate. I approached the nearest tree and examined the symbol burned into its bark. It was identical to the ones I'd found in the children's rooms, but much larger, about a foot across. The burn marks were deep, seared into the wood, with such heat that the bark had fused into blackened glass. I touched it carefully, and the bark was cold, far colder than it should have been, cold enough that my fingertips went numb. As I pulled my hand away, I heard it, singing. It started so softly I thought I might be imagining it, a woman's voice humming a melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then the humming became words in a language I'd never heard but somehow felt in my bones. The consonants were harsh, guttural, like stones grinding together. The vowels flowed like water, rising and falling in patterns that seemed to twist the air itself. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt their meaning wash over me like a wave. Loneliness so deep, it had become rage. Love so twisted, it had become hunger. Grief so profound, it had curdled into something monstrous. The song spoke of promises broken and debts unpaid, of innocence burned away and darkness left behind, of revenge that would span centuries because some wrongs could never be forgiven. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Show yourself. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to reveal yourself." The singing stopped. The silence that followed was worse, thick and expectant, like the world itself was holding its breath. I could feel eyes on me, not just one pair but many, watching from the darkness between the trees. My skin crawled, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this clearing and never come back. Then she appeared. One moment I was alone in the clearing. The next, the woman stood at its center, perhaps 20 feet from where I stood frozen. She matched the photographs, exactly. Impossibly tall and thin, with long dark hair that hung limp and lifeless around a face that was more skull than flesh. Her dress had once been white, but was now grey and tattered, stained with dirt and what looked like old blood. Her feet were bare, and I could see that her toes were blackened, as if they'd been frostbitten or burned. But her eyes, God help me, her eyes, they weren't empty, as the children had described. They were full, terribly full, filled with something that made my mind stagger back from comprehension. Looking into those eyes was like looking into an abyss that looked back, that saw everything you'd ever done or thought or felt, that judged you and found you wanting. They held centuries of pain and power, of knowledge that humans weren't meant to possess. She wasn't solid. I could see through her, see the trees beyond her translucent form. She flickered like a candle flame struggling against the wind, there and not there simultaneously. The air around her shimmered and distorted, reality itself seeming to reject her presence. "Father Daniel Cromwell," she said, and her voice was the same as the singing, but now formed into words I could understand. She spoke English with no accent, as if she'd known every language that had ever existed. "You're not ready for this. You don't understand what you're looking for." I raised my crucifix, began to speak the words of protection I'd memorized years ago, the prayers that had worked against demons and dark spirits. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti, adiuro te..." She laughed. The sound was horrible, like wind through a crypt, like the last breath of something dying. "Your prayers mean nothing here, priest. Save your breath. I'm not a demon. I'm not your enemy. I'm not what you think I am at all." "You're taking children," I said, forcing strength into my voice I didn't feel. "That makes you my enemy, regardless of what you are." Pain flashed across her face, and for a moment, She looked heartbreakingly human. I'm not taking them. God, I wish I could make you understand. I'm trying to stop them. The 7 sisters. They're the ones who want the children. I've been holding them back for 177 years, but I'm fading. Soon, I won't be able to stop them anymore. She took a step toward me, and I instinctively stepped back. My foot caught on a root and I nearly fell. She stopped, holding up her hands in what might have been a placating gesture. Go back to your Vatican, Father, she said, and I could hear exhaustion in her voice, a weariness so profound it made me ache. Tell them to seal this village, evacuate everyone, salt the earth and burn the forest. It's the only way to stop what's coming. I can't do that, I said. I need to understand what's happening here. Tell me the truth. All of it. She studied me for a long moment, her head tilted at an angle that looked wrong, too far to the side, like a bird examining something curious. Then she smiled, and it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. Very well, she said softly, but don't say I didn't warn you, Father Cromwell. Some truths are more dangerous than any lie. She raised one skeletal arm and pointed at the trees surrounding us. As I watched, 6 more figures began to materialize in the spaces between the oaks. They emerged slowly, like smoke given form, taking shape from shadows and mist. They were similar to Isadora, translucent and flickering, but where she seemed tired and sad, these figures radiated pure malevolence. I could feel their hunger from across the clearing, a desperate, all-consuming need that made my stomach turn. They were dressed in the remnants of what had once been simple peasant clothing, now burned and tattered. Their faces were twisted with rage and pain, mouths open in silent screams, eyes burning with hatred so intense it felt physical. Their hands reached toward me, fingers elongated into claw-like points, blackened as if they'd been burned. In 1723, Isadora began, her voice cutting through my terror. 7 women lived in this village: Anca Popa, Doina Stancu, Elena Munteanu, Florina Diaconu, Geta Ionescu, Helena Stoica, and Ilinca Radulescu. They were healers, midwives, herbalists. They helped people. They delivered babies and cured sickness and eased pain. They maintained the old relationship with this forest, the relationship that had kept the village safe for 500 years. The 6 figures around the clearing grew more solid as she spoke. I could see their faces now in horrifying detail. They'd been young once, some of them barely more than girls. Beautiful even. But death and rage had twisted them into something monstrous. Then a new priest came to the village, Isadora continued, her voice hardening. Father Andrei Vasile. He was 26 years old, fresh from seminary, full of zeal and certainty. He saw the old traditions as heresy, the old ways as devil worship. He declared war on everything that existed before his God. One of the figures lunged forward, and I flinched, raising my crucifix, but Isadora moved between us, faster than should have been possible, and the figure recoiled as if struck by an invisible blow. Isadora's form dimmed noticeably, becoming less substantial. Father Vasile identified the 7 women who still practiced the old ways, she said, and I could hear the effort it was costing her to hold the sisters back. He called them witches, servants of Satan. He convinced the village that every misfortune was their doing. A child died of fever, the witches cursed her. A crop failed, the witches blighted it. A woman miscarried, the witches caused it. They were given a trial. Isadora's voice dripped with contempt, if you can call it that. Testimony from neighbours who claimed to have seen them dancing naked under the full moon. A midwife who said she found strange herbs in one woman's garden. A child who swore she saw one of them talking to a crow. That was the evidence. That was enough. The sisters were fully visible now, circling the clearing like wolves. I could see the burn marks on their skin, see where the flames had consumed them. One had her hair completely burned away. leaving only charred scalp. Another had her hands fused together, melted by the heat. A third had her mouth open in a permanent scream, her throat visibly scorched. "They dragged the 7 women to this clearing," Isadora said, and now her voice was shaking. "To these very trees. They bound each woman to an oak and piled wood at their feet. Father Vasile himself lit the fires. He stood right where you're standing now and watched them burn. According to his journal, he felt no remorse. He was proud of what he'd done, proud of saving the village from corruption." The women screamed for hours. The village could hear them down in the valley, those screams echoing off the mountains. But Father Vasile heard something else. He heard them singing as they burned, singing in a language older than Latin, older than Romanian, older than any tongue spoken by living men. They were cursing the village, cursing him, cursing every man, woman, and child who stood by and let this happen. One of the sisters moved closer, and I could see her face clearly now. She'd been perhaps 18 when she died, with delicate features that would have been lovely. Now her skin was blackened and cracked, her eyes white and blind, her mouth twisted into a rictus of hate. She reached toward me, and I felt cold radiate from her fingers, cold so intense it made my bones ache. "They swore they would return," Isadora said. "They swore they would take the children of those who condemned them. They swore their revenge would span generations, would never end until every bloodline that participated in their murder was extinct. Their hatred was so pure, so intense that it burned through death itself. They didn't pass on. They didn't find rest. They stayed here, trapped between life and death, feeding on rage and grief, growing stronger year by year." "And you?" I managed to ask, unable to take my eyes off the circling sisters. "What are you? How do you fit into this?" "I'm a fool," she said simply. "In 1847, I was a real witch, not like those poor women. I had actual power, learned from my grandmother, who learned from hers, passed down through generations. I heard about the 7 sisters, about their curse. I thought I could help them. I thought I could give them peace, send them to their proper rest." She laughed bitterly. "I was so arrogant. I came here thinking I understood death, thinking my power was enough. I performed a ritual, used my own life force as a seal to bind them, to keep them from carrying out their curse. It worked for a time. The disappearances stopped. The village was safe. But there's always a price for magic this dark. The ritual bound me too. I became the seal itself, the lock that kept them imprisoned. I couldn't leave, I couldn't rest. I had to stay here, conscious and aware, fighting them every single moment of every single day. And slowly, so slowly, I began to fade. My power diminishing year by year, my strength draining away." Another sister lunged, and again Isadora intercepted her. This time the impact was visible, a flash of pale light that made both figures stagger. Isadora's form was barely visible now, like fog in sunlight. "Every time I stop them, it costs me," she said, and her voice was growing fainter. "Every time they test the binding, I have to use more of myself to hold them back. I've been doing this for 177 years, Father Cromwell. 177 years of fighting, of holding them back, of preventing them from taking their revenge. But I'm almost gone. Maybe another week, maybe less. And when I finally fade completely, when there's nothing left of me to fuel the binding, they'll be free." "How many children have they taken?" I asked. 7 so far. 1 for each sister. They're rebuilding themselves, you see, becoming more solid, more real. Each child they take strengthens them, gives them more power to break through. If they complete the ritual, if they take 7 children and bind them properly, they'll break free entirely. And then they won't stop at 7. They'll take every child in this village, then the next village, then the next." She showed me then. I don't know how she did it, but suddenly I could see beyond the clearing. see a vision of what would happen if the sisters broke free. I saw thousands of translucent figures spreading across Romania like a plague, each one singing that terrible song. I saw children disappearing from their beds, saw parents screaming and searching and finding nothing. I saw the sisters building an army of the stolen, and the lost saw that army growing until it spanned continents. They'll spread across Europe first, Isadora said, then Asia, then the Americas. They'll take children from every family that ever wronged them, and when they run out of those, they'll simply take all children. They'll raise them in the darkness, teach them to sing the old songs, turn them into something neither living nor dead. And the world will learn what happens when you burn innocence, when you kill out of fear and call it righteousness. The vision faded, and I was back in the clearing, trembling. "How do I stop them?" I demanded. "There has to be a way." Isadora's face was barely visible now, just a pale suggestion in the darkness. "There's only one way. Someone has to take my place. Someone has to offer themselves willingly, use their own life force to reinforce the seal. It needs to be voluntary, given with full understanding of what it means. A priest would be even better than a witch. Your faith, your connection to the divine, it would make the binding stronger, last longer." "You're asking me to sacrifice myself?" "I'm telling you the truth. You can seal them for another century, maybe 2, if your faith is strong enough. Or you can walk away, return to Rome, report this as unsolvable. And 7 children will die tonight. Then 7 more. Then hundreds. Then thousands. The choice is yours, Father Cromwell, but you don't have much time." "Why haven't you told anyone else? Why didn't you explain this to the priests the Vatican sent before?" "I tried," she said, and I heard centuries of frustration in her voice. "In 1893, I appeared to Father Giovanni Rossi. I explained everything, begged him to find another way, to research the old magic and discover how to give the sisters true peace. He ran, fled back to Rome, and never spoke of what he'd seen. In 1956, I tried again with Father Henri Dubois. Same result. In 1978, Father Patrick O'Sullivan. He listened, but he didn't believe me. He thought I was a demon trying to trick him. He performed an exorcism, which did nothing but waste time. They all ran or dismissed me, and I remained here, growing weaker, watching the village, waiting for someone who might understand, waiting for someone who might be brave enough or desperate enough or faithful enough to make the sacrifice. Why me? Because you're still here, she said simply. Because you came looking for truth instead of just confirming what you already believed. Because I'm out of time and you're all I have left. Then she was gone, and the sisters were gone, and I was alone in the clearing with Father Lucian, who I hadn't even realized had followed me. He was on his knees making the sign of the cross over and over, muttering prayers in Romanian. I helped him to his feet and we stumbled back through the forest to the village. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? We'd just been told that the only way to save the village, perhaps the world, was for me to sacrifice myself, to lie down in that cursed earth and bind myself to those 7 vengeful spirits for the rest of my existence, however long that might last. Back in Father Lucian's quarters, I poured myself a glass of tweaker and drank it in one swallow, then immediately poured another. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the glass. Father Lucian sat heavily in his chair, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. "What will you do?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I need to think. I need to pray. I need to research. There has to be another way." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I'd spent 12 years investigating the supernatural. I knew genuine evil when I encountered it, knew when a situation was beyond normal solutions. The 7 sisters were beyond exorcism, beyond prayers of binding or banishment. They'd been created by evil done to them, by the cruelty and fear of people who should have known better. And that kind of evil couldn't be defeated. It could only be contained. I spent the rest of the night in the church basement, going through Father Lucian's archives, reading every document about the village's history. I found the original records of the trial in 1723. The accusations were laughable. Anca-Popa had been seen collecting herbs in the forest at midnight. Doina Stancu had cured a child's fever when the village doctor had failed. Elena Munteanu had delivered 3 stillborn babies in a row, clearly proof she was cursed. Florina Diaconu kept a black cat. Geta Ionescu had been heard singing in a strange language. Helena Stoica had refused a marriage proposal from a powerful man in the village. Ilinca Radulescu was simply too beautiful, which meant she must have made a pact with the devil. These were the crimes for which 7 women had been burned alive. I found Father Andrei Vasilei's journal, and reading it made me sick. He described the burnings in clinical detail, how they'd bound each woman to a tree, how they'd stacked the wood carefully to ensure a slow burn, how they'd waited until sunset so the flames would be more visible. He'd written about their screams with something approaching satisfaction. He'd noted that they'd started singing about halfway through, and that the singing had disturbed him more than the screaming, because he couldn't understand the words. They sang until their voices gave out, he'd written, until their throats burned and their lungs filled with smoke, but I could still hear the song after they died. It echoed in the valley all night. I pray it is not an omen of evil to come. It was an omen. It was a promise. And for 301 years, that promise had been festering in the darkness, growing stronger, waiting for a chance to be fulfilled. I found entries from the years immediately following the burnings. Strange things had happened in Morăști. Animals found dead with no marks on their bodies. Crops failing in fields that had been fertile for generations. Women miscarrying at alarming rates. Children waking up screaming about women in their rooms. And then, in 1730, 7 years after the burnings, the first child had disappeared. Luminita Dumitrescu, age 7, granddaughter of one of the men who'd helped carry out the executions. She'd gone to bed normally and was gone by morning. No evidence, no explanation. Just gone. Over the next 17 years, 12 more children vanished. All from families whose ancestors had participated in the burnings. The village lived in constant fear, but they couldn't leave. Where would they go? This was their home, their land, everything they knew. Then, in 1847, Isadora Vladescu had arrived, and the disappearances stopped. For 3 months, there was peace. Then, Father Gheorghe Popescu, suspicious of their mysterious saviour, had followed her into the forest. He'd seen her in the clearing, seen the 7 sisters manifest around her, heard her performing some kind of ritual. He'd fled back to the village and denounced her as a witch. The villagers, terrified that the curse would return if they harboured another witch, had turned against Isadora. They'd gathered a mob, intent on burning her just as they'd burned the 7 sisters. But before they could seize her, 5 children had disappeared in a single night. The sisters had broken free just long enough to take their revenge for the interruption. Isadora had completed the binding ritual that same night, using those 5 children as sacrifices to power the seal. It was terrible, monstrous even, but it had worked. The sisters had been imprisoned again, and no more children had been taken. For 177 years, Isadora had held them. 1 woman against 7 vengeful spirits, fighting every single day, slowly consuming herself to keep them contained. And now she was asking me to take her place. I closed the journal and sat back, exhausted. The candle on the desk had burned down to almost nothing. Through the small basement window, I could see the sky beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. What would you do If you were in my place, what choice would you make? I could return to Rome, report the case as unsolvable, recommend that the village be evacuated and the forest burned, though I knew the Vatican would never authorize such extreme measures based on one investigator's report. The disappearances would continue, the sisters would break free, and I would live with the knowledge that I could have stopped it and chose not to. Or I could make the sacrifice, lie down in that cursed earth and bind myself to those 7 monsters for the next century or more. I would save the children, save the village, save potentially thousands of innocent lives. But I would suffer for it. Oh God, how I would suffer. Isadora had described it clearly enough. Constant pain, constant pressure, fighting every moment of every day. To hold them back, slowly fading, slowly dying, but never quite reaching death. How long could a human consciousness endure that? How long before the pain and isolation drove me mad? How long before I became like Isadora, a hollow shell barely clinging to existence? But then I thought about Raluca, who loved to draw flowers, about the Ionescu twins who'd never grow up to fulfill their potential, about little Petru, only 6 years old, torn from his family, about all the children who would follow if I did nothing. I thought about something my grandfather had told me when I was young, shortly before he died. He'd fought in World War II, had seen terrible things, had made impossible choices. I'd asked him once how he'd found the courage to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Courage isn't the absence of fear, he'd said. It's the decision that something else is more important than your fear. When you stand between innocence and evil, when you're the only thing stopping something terrible from happening, you don't get to choose the easy path, you choose the necessary one. I opened my journal and began to write. I wrote about my childhood in Boston, about my mother, who'd died of cancer when I was 12, about my father who'd worked 2 jobs to keep me in Catholic school. I wrote about the day I decided to become a priest, sitting in the chapel after my mother's funeral, feeling her presence so strongly, I knew she hadn't truly left. I wrote about my years in seminary, about the friends I'd made and the doubts I'd wrestled with. I wrote about my first exorcism, how terrifying and exhilarating it had been to face genuine evil and see it retreat before faith and prayer. I wrote about every case I'd investigated, every person I'd helped, every time I'd stood between the innocent and the darkness. I wrote about my fears and doubts, about the times my faith had wavered, about the nights I questioned whether God was even listening. And I wrote about my decision. I wrote until dawn broke over the mountains, until my hand cramped and my eyes burned with exhaustion. Then I set down my pen, closed my journal, and went to find Father Lucian. He was in the church, kneeling before the altar, praying. I could hear him murmuring in Romanian, his voice thick with emotion. I sat in the pew behind him and waited. When he finally crossed himself and stood, turning to face me, he already knew what I'd decided. I could see it in his eyes. "You're going to do it," he said. It wasn't a question. "I need you to do something for me first," I said. "I need to meet with the families, all of them. I need to see the children one more time, even if only in photographs and stories." Over the next day, Father Lucian arranged meetings with each family who'd lost a child. I spent hours with them, listening to their stories, looking at photographs, hearing about the little quirks and dreams that made each child unique. Catalina and Mihai Stoica showed me Raluca's drawings, hundreds of them covering every available surface in their home. Birds and flowers and forests, drawn with a child's earnest love of beauty. Catalina told me how Raluca would spend hours in the garden studying the way petals caught the light, determined to capture it perfectly on paper. She wanted to be an artist, Catalina said, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to go to Bucharest, to art school. She had so many dreams. Ileana and Bogdan Ionescu showed me videos on their phone, the only modern technology I'd seen in the village. The Ionescu twins, Andrei and Bogdan, identical in appearance but completely different in personality. Andrei was quiet and thoughtful, always reading, already teaching himself mathematics far beyond his age. Bogdan was energetic and outgoing, constantly moving, making friends with everyone. They completed each other, Ileana said, her voice hollow. Andrei would read something and explain it to Bogdan. Bogdan would drag Andrei outside to play. They were never apart, and now they're both gone, and I don't know how to keep living. The Mihalescu family told me about Florin, age 12, who'd wanted to be a doctor. He'd spent hours reading medical books borrowed from the village doctor, memorizing anatomy, pestering adults with questions about how the body worked. The Popa family spoke of Adriana, only 6, who was afraid of the dark but loved stargazing. Her father, Adrian, had been teaching her the constellations, and she'd been learning to identify them. The Dumitru family remembered Christian, age 14, who'd just learned to play the violin. He'd practiced for hours every day, despite having no formal training, teaching himself from videos when his family made their monthly trip to the nearest town with internet. And the Diaconou family, still raw with grief, talked about Petru, age 6, who collected rocks. His room was full of them, each one labelled in his careful child's handwriting, with where he'd found it and what type of rock he thought it was. These weren't statistics. They weren't case files or abstract concepts. They were children with futures, with potential, with families who loved them and would never recover from their loss. By the time I finished the last interview, it was early evening. I returned to the church where Father Lucian was waiting with a letter I'd written to Cardinal Benedetti. "Send this tomorrow morning," I told him, "not before. And Father Lucian, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let them forget. The Vatican will want to seal this case, to bury it in the archives and pretend it never happened. Don't let them. Keep telling the story. Make sure someone knows what happened here, what I did, and why. Not for glory or remembrance, but so that someone might find a better solution someday. So that someone might discover a way to give the Seven Sisters true peace, to end this cycle instead of just delaying it." Father Lucian nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I promise. I'll tell everyone who will listen. And I'll come to the clearing every week I'm able, to pray for you. You won't be alone, Father Cromwell, not while I live." At 9 o'clock that evening, I heard the commotion from the church. Shouting, a woman screaming. I ran outside to find half the village gathered around the Diaconou house. Little Petru's mother, Andrea, was being held back by her husband and neighbours, trying desperately to run into the house. "She's here," Andrea screamed. "She's in his room. I can hear her singing." My blood ran cold. Petru had already been taken. This should be impossible. I pushed through the crowd and ran up the stairs to Petru's room. The door was closed and I could hear it. That terrible singing. The words in that impossible language. But this time it was different. This time there were multiple voices, all harmonizing, creating a sound that made my teeth ache and my eyes water. I tried the door. It wouldn't move. I threw my shoulder against it once, twice, 3 times. The wood was solid, unyielding, as if I were trying to move a mountain. "Stand back," I shouted to the family below. I pressed my crucifix against the door and began to recite the ritual of exorcism, the most powerful prayers I knew. The singing grew louder, more insistent, challenging me. The door began to vibrate under my hand, the wood growing hot and then cold and then hot again. Then, suddenly it flew open with such force that I stumbled through into darkness. The room was freezing, my breath coming out in white clouds that hung in the air. The temperature must have been below 0. Impossible for a room that had been normal just hours ago. And there, standing over Petru's empty bed, was Isadora. But she was barely visible now, just a pale outline, flickering like a dying candle. Behind her, fully visible and solid, were the 7 sisters. They'd broken through. The binding had failed. "No!" I shouted, moving between them and the bed, though Petru was already gone. "You can't do this!" "It's too late," Isadora said, and I could barely hear her voice. "I can't hold them anymore. This is the 7th child. The ritual is complete. They're free now, Father Cromwell, free to take their revenge on this village and every village after it. Unless..." She looked at me with those terrible, knowing eyes. "Unless I take your place right now," I finished. "Yes, but you need to understand. If you do this now, while they're this strong, the binding will be even more painful. You'll feel them constantly, every second pressing against you, trying to break free. And I don't know how long you'll last. A year? 10 years? 50? Your suffering will be immense, Father. Beyond anything I've endured." I looked at the 7 sisters, truly saw them for the first time at full power. They were beautiful and terrible, young women twisted by rage and pain into something monstrous. I could see their individual faces now, see the humanity they'd once possessed. Anka, who'd been 17 when she burned. Doina, barely 16. Elena, 23. Florina, 19. Geta, 21. Helena, 18. Ilinka, the youngest, at just 15. They'd been girls, children themselves, barely more than the ones they were now stealing. And I understood then that this wasn't about good versus evil. This was about a cycle of trauma and revenge that had been spinning for 300 years. The village had burned 7 innocent women. Those women's rage had created 7 monsters. Those monsters would create more monsters, who would create more, on and on forever, unless someone broke the cycle. I couldn't break it, but I could stop it from spreading. I could buy time for someone smarter or holier or more powerful to find a real solution. I made my choice. "Tell me what to do," I said. Isadora's relief was visible, her form brightening slightly. "Go to the clearing, now, before they can take another child. I'll hold them here as long as I can, but you must hurry." I ran, down the stairs past the confused and terrified family, through the village streets, into the forest. I didn't use a flashlight this time. Something was guiding me, pulling me forward through the darkness. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I ran as if the devil himself were chasing me. Maybe he was. The clearing appeared before me faster than should have been possible. The 7 trees stood in their eternal circle, and I could see now that the ground inside the circle was scorched black, burned so thoroughly that nothing had grown there in 300 years. In the center was a depression, roughly the size and shape of a human body. A grave. My grave. Isadora appeared beside me, flickering weakly. "Lie down in the center, it must be willing. You must choose this freely, with full knowledge of what it means." "I know," I said. "Tell me the words." She taught me the ritual. The words were in that same terrible language the sisters used, the language that hurt to hear and hurt worse to speak. Each syllable felt like swallowing broken glass, like forcing something fundamentally wrong through my throat. But I repeated them after her, again and again, until I had them memorized. "Once you begin," she warned, "there's no stopping. The binding will take hold immediately. You'll feel them trying to break through, and you'll have to hold them back, every second of every day, for as long as your strength lasts. And Father Cromwell, I need you to understand. You won't die. You'll exist in a state between life and death, conscious and aware, for years, decades, maybe centuries. You'll feel pain every moment, pain like you can't imagine. You'll be trapped in this clearing, unable to move, unable to sleep, unable to find any peace." "What happens to the children? The ones they've taken?" "When you complete the binding, it will reverse their hold. The children will wake up in their beds, safe. They won't remember anything that happened. Their parents will think it was all a nightmare, life will go on. And you? What happens to you? For the first time since I'd met her, Isadora truly smiled. I'll finally get to rest. I've been so tired for so long, Father. Tired beyond any concept of exhaustion you can imagine. Thank you for giving me this gift. I lay down in the depression. The scorched earth was cold beneath me, radiating a chill that went deeper than physical temperature. I could feel something stirring in the ground, something ancient and hungry, sensing my presence and preparing to consume me. Will you stay? I asked Isadora, just for the beginning. I'll stay as long as I can, she promised, but when the ritual completes, I'll have to let go. We can't both be bound to them. I took a deep breath, looked up at the stars barely visible through the canopy, thought about everyone I was leaving behind, everyone I'd never see again. I thought about my father, who'd be devastated when he learned I'd disappeared. About my friends in Rome, who'd wonder what had happened to me, about the life I'd planned, the future I'd imagined. And then I thought about Raluca and the twins and Florin and Adriana and Christian and Petru, about their families, about all the children who would follow if I didn't do this. I began to speak the words. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The moment the first syllable left my mouth, agony exploded through every nerve in my body. It felt like I was being torn apart and reassembled, like every cell was being rewritten. The ground beneath me grew burning hot, then freezing cold, then hot again. My muscles seized up, my back arching, and I couldn't have stopped speaking if I'd wanted to. The words poured out of me like I was a puppet and something else controlled my strings. I saw them materialize around the clearing. The 7 sisters, no longer translucent or flickering, but solid and real, and more terrifying than I'd ever imagined. They were completely manifested now, fully present in our world for the first time in 3 centuries. Their rage was palpable, a physical presence that pressed down on me, like the weight of the earth itself. They lunged toward me, and I felt the binding snap into place. Invisible chains wrapped around them, around me, connecting us in a way that was more intimate and horrible than anything I could have imagined. I could feel their hatred, their hunger, their desperate need for revenge. It poured into me like poison, burning through my veins, filling every space inside me until I thought I would burst from it. But I kept speaking the words. Isadora stood in the center of the circle, between me and the sisters, her arms raised. She was drawing power from my sacrifice, using it to reinforce the binding one final time. The sisters fought her with everything they had, clawing and screaming and throwing themselves against the invisible barriers forming around them. But my power was fresh, my will was strong, and together Isadora and I pushed them back. I felt the children then, Raluca, the twins, Florin, Adriana, Christian, Petru. They were trapped in some dark space with the sisters, caught between worlds, changing into something neither living nor dead. Their terror washed over me, and I focused everything I had on them. The binding wasn't just about imprisoning the sisters, it was about reclaiming what they'd stolen. I pushed. God, how I pushed. I channeled every ounce of strength, every fragment of faith, every desperate hope into freeing those children. I felt them begin to move, felt them being pulled away from the sisters' grasp, drawn back towards the world of light and life. The sisters screamed. The sound shattered the night, a wail of pure anguish and fury that seemed to crack the sky itself. They fought to hold on to the children, their claws digging in, refusing to let go of their prizes. But I was stronger. For this one moment, fueled by sacrifice and desperation, I was stronger than their 300 years of hate. One by one, I felt the children slip free. Raluca first, then the twins together, then Florin, then Adriana, then Christian, and finally little Petru. They snapped back to their bodies like rubber bands released, and I knew they were waking up in their beds right now, safe and whole, with their parents crying over them in relief and joy. The sisters howled in rage at their loss, but it was too late. The final words of the ritual left my mouth and the world exploded. Light erupted from the ground, from the trees, from Isadora herself. It was neither holy nor unholy, just pure power, raw and ancient and terrible. The sisters were blown backwards, slamming into barriers that now surrounded the clearing in a perfect circle. They raged and clawed and beat against the invisible walls, but they couldn't break through. The binding was complete. Isadora looked down at me, and she was glowing now, becoming translucent in a different way than before. This time she wasn't fading. She was ascending, finally being released from her long imprisonment. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice was filled with peace I hadn't heard before. "Guard them well, Father Daniel Cromwell. I'm sorry for what you're about to endure. I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on you. But know this, you've saved countless lives today. Hundreds, maybe thousands of children will grow up safe because of your sacrifice. That has to mean something." "Will anyone find a better way?" I asked, my voice barely working. "Will someone eventually free the sisters, give them peace?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I hope so. I've hoped for 177 years. Maybe your hope will be stronger than mine. Maybe your faith will inspire someone to find the answer I never could." Then she began to fade, her form dissolving into light. For just a moment, I saw her as she'd been in life. A young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Someone who'd tried to help and paid a terrible price for her compassion. "Rest well," I told her. "You too someday," she replied. "Someday, Father. I promise." Then she was gone, and I was alone with the 7 sisters. The pain didn't stop. It intensified. I could feel them now, constantly pressing against the binding from every direction. It was like being crushed slowly under a great weight. The pressure building and building with no relief. Every nerve in my body was on fire. Every breath was agony. Every heartbeat was torture. And I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, trapped in the depression at the center of the clearing. I could breathe, could see and hear and feel, but I couldn't so much as twitch a finger. I was a prisoner in my own flesh, and I would remain that way for years, decades, maybe longer. The sisters circled the clearing, testing the boundaries, looking for weaknesses. When they realized I was helpless, they came closer. All 7 of them gathered around me, their terrible faces inches from mine. They were so close I could see every detail of their burned flesh, could smell the char and ash that clung to them, could feel the cold radiating from their presence. They began to speak to me in that ancient language. I could understand them now, could hear every word of their hatred and their promises. "You think you've won, priest?" Anka hissed, her voice like wind through dead branches. "You've only delayed us. We'll break you, just like we broke the witch before you. We'll wear you down day by day, year by year," Doina whispered, her breath cold against my cheek. "We'll tell you about every child we would have taken, every family we would have destroyed. We'll make you feel responsible for keeping us from our righteous revenge." "You'll watch the seasons change from this prison," Elena said. "You'll watch the village below and know you can never return to it. You'll see people living their lives while you suffer in this cursed earth." "We'll drive you mad," Florina promised. "We'll fill your mind with visions of what could have been, of the life you gave up. We'll make you regret this choice every single moment until there's nothing left of you but screaming." "And then we'll be free," Geta said with cruel satisfaction. "And we'll take every child in the world. We'll make them sing our song. We'll build an army of the lost and the stolen." "You'll have to watch it happen," Helena added, helpless, hopeless, knowing that your sacrifice meant nothing in the end. "Your church abandoned you," Alinka said, the youngest, but perhaps the cruelest. "Your God has forsaken you. You're alone here with us, and we have nothing but time and hate. They laughed, and the sound echoed through the forest, through the valley, through my very soul. But they were wrong about something. My sacrifice did mean something. Right now, in the village below, 7 children were waking up in their beds. 7 families were experiencing the greatest joy of their lives. Parents were holding their children, crying tears of relief and gratitude, thanking God for a miracle they didn't understand. Catalina and Mihai were embracing Raluca, who would grow up to be an artist. Ileana and Bogdan were reunited with their twins, who would become an engineer and a teacher. The Mihailescu family had Florin back, their future doctor. The Popas were holding little Adriana, who would overcome her fear of the dark. The Dimitris had Christian returned, who would master the violin, and the Diaconus were weeping over Petru, who would continue collecting rocks and labelling them in his careful handwriting. Those children would live. They would grow up. They would have families of their own, and for as long as I could hold these sisters back, no more children would be taken. That had to be enough. The sun rose over the mountains, and I watched it from my prison in the earth. The light touched the tops of the 7 trees, filtered down through the canopy, created patterns of shadow and illumination across the scorched ground. It was beautiful, in its way. I tried to focus on that beauty instead of the pain. Tried to find something to hold on to as the sisters pressed against me, testing my strength, searching for cracks. I couldn't close my eyes, couldn't look away. I would watch countless sunrises from here, countless sunsets, countless stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. I would watch the seasons change, autumn giving way to winter, snow covering the clearing in white silence, spring bringing new growth to everything except this cursed circle, summer making the air heavy and thick. The cycle would repeat year after year, and I would be here for all of it. Around midday, Father Lucian came looking for me. I heard him calling my name, heard the fear in his voice growing as he got closer to the clearing. He found me lying in the depression, my eyes open and staring upward, my chest barely moving with shallow breaths. He knelt beside me, checked for a pulse with trembling fingers. "Father Cromwell," he whispered, "what have you done? Oh God, what have you done?" I tried to speak, tried to move my lips to tell him I was still here, still conscious, still aware, but nothing happened. My body was locked, frozen, a prison I couldn't escape. Father Lucian must have seen something in my eyes, some flicker of awareness, because he began to weep. He stayed with me for hours, praying, begging me to speak, to move, to give him some sign that I was still in there. He told me about the children, how they'd all woken up safely, how the village was rejoicing, how families were celebrating the miracle of their return. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved them, all of them. You're a hero, Father Cromwell, a true martyr." But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who'd made a terrible bargain and was only beginning to understand the price. As the sun began to set, Father Lucian stood up. "I'll come back," he promised. "Every week, I'll come to this clearing and pray for you. I'll tell your story. I'll make sure you're not forgotten. I swear it on my soul." He left as darkness fell, and I was alone with the sisters again. They resumed their circling, their taunting, their constant pressure against the binding. I learned quickly that I could retreat into my mind, could find places inside myself where the pain was more distant and their voices were just background noise. I thought about my life. I relived every memory with perfect clarity. My mother's laugh, my father's strong hands, my first day of seminary, my ordination, every case I'd ever investigated. I thought about books I'd read, prayers I'd memorized, sermons I'd heard. I built castles in my mind, created entire worlds where I could escape for brief moments before the pain dragged me back. And I thought about the children. I imagined their futures, gave them full lives in my mind. I saw Raluca becoming a famous artist, her drawings hanging in galleries. I saw the Ionescu twins growing up, one discovering a cure for disease, the other teaching generations of students. I saw Florin saving lives as a doctor, Adriana mapping the stars she'd once feared, Christian performing in concert halls, Petru becoming a geologist who unlocked secrets hidden in stone. These fantasies sustained me through the first days, which felt like years. The pain was constant, unrelenting, but I found I could bear it if I had something to hold on to, some reason to keep fighting. Father Lucian kept his promise. Every Sunday he came to the clearing and sat with me. He told me about the village, about baptisms and weddings and funerals. He read to me from the Bible, from my favourite passages. He brought news from the outside world, though it all seemed distant and unreal. The children are doing well, he told me on his third visit. Raluca has started drawing again. The twins are back in school. Florin is reading medical books. They don't remember anything about what happened. The doctors say it's a blessing, a mercy, but their parents remember. They remember the fear, the loss, the joy of having them returned. And they pray for you, Father Cromwell. Every day they pray for the priest who saved their children. 3 years passed this way. 3 years of Father Lucian's weekly visits, of seasons changing, of pain and pressure, and the constant battle to hold the sisters back. 3 years of watching the world continue without me, of existing in a state between life and death, of fighting every moment not to give in to despair. Then, one Sunday, Father Lucian didn't come, or the next, or the next. I learned later from the young priest who came to investigate the clearing that Father Lucian had died peacefully in his sleep. He was 74 years old, and the village had mourned him deeply. He'd been their priest for 43 years, had baptized most of them, married them, buried their parents. The new priest was Father Andrei Constantinescu, only 32 years old, fresh from seminary in Bucharest. He was skeptical of the old stories, modern in his thinking, convinced that most supernatural claims had rational explanations. He examined me with clinical detachment and concluded I was in some kind of catatonic state, possibly from a psychotic break or severe trauma. "We need to get him to a hospital," he told the villagers who'd gathered. "He needs proper medical care." They tried to move me. 4 strong men gripped my arms and legs, prepared to lift me from the depression. The moment they pulled, the binding began to fail. The sisters surged forward with such force that the ground shook. The trees around the clearing creaked and groaned. The air itself seemed to rip, and for a brief moment, everyone in the clearing could see them. 7 burned women reaching toward the village with clawed hands, their mouths open in screams of triumph. The men dropped me back into the depression and ran. They fled the clearing in blind panic, Father Andrei with them, and they never came back. After that, no one came at all. The path to the clearing grew overgrown. The village gradually forgot about me, about the strange priest who disappeared years ago. New families moved in, old families moved away. Children who'd been babies when I arrived grew into teenagers who'd never heard my name. The world moved on, as it always does, and I became just another mystery, another piece of local folklore that people half believed and half dismissed. But I remember everything. I've been here now for 6 years, 3 months and 14 days. I know because I've counted every sunrise, every sunset, every star that crosses the patch of sky, visible through the canopy. I've watched the trees grow, watched seasons cycle, watched birds build nests in the branches above me and raise their young and fly away. The children I saved are growing up. Raluca is 15 now, though I haven't seen her. I can only imagine how she looks, how her drawings have evolved, whether she still dreams of art school in Bucharest. The twins are 13, Florin 18, Adriana 12, Christian 20, Petru 12 as well. They're living their lives, pursuing their dreams, having experiences I'll never have again. And I'm here, holding back the darkness. The sisters have grown stronger over the years. They've learned my weaknesses, discovered which memories hurt most when they drag them to the surface. They've mastered the art of psychological torture, knowing exactly how to make every moment as agonizing as possible. But I've grown stronger too. I've learned to build walls in my mind, to create sanctuaries where they can't reach me. I've discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed, depths of faith I'd never had to plumb before. Every day, they try to break me, and every day I hold firm. Some days are harder than others. There are times when the pain becomes so overwhelming that I want to scream and never stop. Times when I give anything for just one moment of peace, one instant, without the constant pressure of their presence. There are nights when I question everything. Whether I made the right choice, whether my sacrifice will mean anything in the end, whether God is watching, or if I'm truly alone. But then I think about Catalina holding Raluca, about Ileana laughing with her twins, about all the families who remained whole because I chose to break myself, and I find the strength to endure one more day. I can feel myself fading now, though. Isadora was right about that. The binding is consuming me, slowly but steadily, using my life force to fuel itself. I'm not the man I was 6 years ago. Something essential is being burned away, year by year, leaving less and less of Daniel Cromwell behind. Sometimes I struggle to remember my father's face, or the name of the street I grew up on, or the prayers I once knew by heart. How much longer can I last? 10 more years? 20? 50? I don't know, but I know I'm weakening. I can feel it in the way the sisters press harder against the binding, the way they smile when they see my struggles. They know that someday, maybe soon, I'll fail. The binding will break, and they'll be free. And when that happens, they won't just take 7 children. They'll take them all. That's why I'm recording this now, using the last shreds of my power to project these words across the boundary between life and death, hoping someone might hear them, might write them down, might understand what's happening here. Morăști needs another protector. The world needs someone to find a better solution than this endless cycle of suffering. Someone needs to discover how to give the 7 sisters true peace, how to heal the wound that was opened in 1723, when 7 innocent women were burned for crimes they didn't commit. I don't know how to do it. I've had 6 years to think, 6 years to pray, 6 years to search my memories for any knowledge that might help. I've found nothing. The sisters are beyond redemption through any means, I understand. They're not demons to be exorcised. They're not ghosts to be laid to rest. They're something else entirely. Human rage and pain concentrated into pure malevolence, and I don't know how to heal that. But someone must, because I can't hold them forever. I can see them right now, all 7 of them circling my prison. They're smiling because they can feel my weakness. They know my time is running out. They're already planning their revenge, already choosing which children to take first when the binding finally shatters. Anka is telling me about a little girl in the village, only 5 years old, whose family descended from those who burned her. Doina is describing a set of triplets, 3 boys who would make excellent additions to their army. Elena is laughing about the fear that will spread when children start disappearing again, how the terror will be even worse because people had thought they were safe. They're singing now, all 7 voices harmonizing in that terrible language. They're singing about freedom, about revenge, about the world they'll create when they finally break free. They're singing about children who will never grow old, about families who will know the grief of loss, about a darkness that will spread across the earth until every parent understands the pain of losing a child. I'm screaming inside, fighting with everything I have left, but I can feel the binding weakening. Cracks are forming, small ones now barely noticeable, but they're there, and they're growing. Please, someone, anyone, find Morăști, find this clearing, find a way to stop them before it's too late, because I can't hold them much longer. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. It's beautiful, this sunset, perhaps the most beautiful I've seen in all my years here. The light filters through the leaves, creates patterns across the scorched earth, touches the tops of the 7 trees with fire. I want to believe it's a sign. I want to believe that God is watching, that this beauty means something, that my suffering has purpose beyond just buying time. I want to believe that someone will hear this confession, will understand the warning, will find a way to end this nightmare. But wanting to believe and believing are different things. And after 6 years in this clearing, after 6 years of constant pain and pressure, and the sisters' poisonous whispers, my faith is worn thin as paper. Still, I hold on. Because what else can I do? The children are safe tonight. Tomorrow they'll wake up and go to school, play with their friends, dream their dreams. Their parents will make them breakfast, help them with homework, tuck them into bed. Life will continue in Morăști, peaceful and ordinary. Because I'm here in this clearing, suffering in their place. That has to be enough. It has to mean something, even if no one remembers my name, even if my sacrifice is forgotten, even if I fade away into nothing, leaving only 7 angry spirits and a scorched circle of earth to mark that I was ever here. The children are safe tonight, and tomorrow, if I'm strong enough, they'll be safe again. And the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as I can endure, for as long as God gives me strength, for as long as the binding holds. My name is Father Daniel Cromwell, and I've been dead for 6 years, 3 months, and 14 days. But I'm still here, holding back the darkness, buying time for someone to find a better way. Please don't make my suffering meaningless. Find another way. Save them. Save us all. The sisters are singing louder now, their voices rising in triumph. They can feel the end approaching, can sense the binding weakening with each passing day. And I can feel it too. The cracks spreading, the chains loosening, my strength failing. But not today. Today, I hold firm. Tomorrow is a question I can't answer, but today the children are safe, and that's all I have left. God forgive me, I couldn't hold them forever. I held them long enough for 7 children to grow up. 7 lives saved, 7 futures preserved, 7 families kept whole. It has to be enough. It has to. The last light is fading from the sky. Night is falling over Morăști. In the village below, parents are tucking their children into bed, kissing their foreheads, whispering that they love them. Those children will sleep peacefully tonight, protected by a sacrifice they'll never know about, shielded by suffering they'll never understand. And I'll be here, in this clearing, fighting to hold back 7 vengeful spirits for 1 more night. 1 more sunrise, 1 more day, until I can't anymore. This is my confession, my testimony, my warning. Don't let it be for nothing.